And today in the US, you have a small group who are still holding on to the neoliberal policies and trying to prevent state regulation. So essentially, as the ruling class become more authoritarian, the working class will, at some point, become more discontent. So it might not be right away. It might be in 10 or 20 years, but there will be some kind of revolt, and one would hope that it will be organized. Okay, so that's it. Yes.
Okay, so I'm just going to introduce Hillel Ticktin, the editor of Critique, and he's going to try to put this all in some sort of theoretical perspective, which is, that of declining capitalism, defining the eras now. And then we're going to open it up to discussion, and hopefully we will have a good 40 minutes of discussion. Hillel Ticktin.
Thank you. I agree with a lot of what's just been said, though.
We can't hear anything. Oh. There's a blower here.
You gotta speak loud.
Can you turn on the mic? No mic for the mic. The
mic is just for recording. It's not a.
Imagine it's a rally. Okay.
Yes. It's a rally, Hillel.
Right.
There's 1,000 people here.
Okay. Okay. I just said I agree with most of what's just been said, though not necessarily all. And secondly, obviously, in 18 minutes, I can't get through what some kind of. I can't get through in 18 minutes a general theoretical viewpoint on what has just happened or what has been happening in the last 30 years or so. So, if you want to, you can either read Critique or, peculiarly, I didn't intend it. Quite a lot of what I've been saying is on YouTube, so you can look at YouTube. But the first point is to try and analyze whether we're in a cyclical downturn, a systemic downturn, or both. In a sense, it seems to me to be a compound of all three. There's a cyclical part of this that is largely over. It's the cyclical part of it, which we're now turning upwards. In a certain sense, it's kind of there's a certain systemic part of it, which is more complex. The third part of it is just simply the crisis of the system itself. And in fact, I've spoken time and again about that, but I'll just go over it very, very, very quickly now. We've been speaking of finance capital. Finance capital, as I understand it, is financial capital which has become independent. Michael has rightly pointed out its short-termist nature. Insofar as short-termist, it is destructive. It is destructive of capital. But in fact, what we've seen is a massive switch to finance capital, a massive switch of the capitalist class towards money as money. As we understand it, capital is self-expanding value. Self-expanding value is based on abstract labor. Money as money is not. We now have a position, or we've had a position since the late 70s, where the capitalist class has shifted towards money as money, where it has proclaimed, Gordon Brown in Britain, so we talked of him, has proclaimed the great utility of finance, money, and the financial sector, which of course has left Britain in an enormous hole since it can no longer pursue that road. But it is peculiar when the capitalist class turns to money as money. In other words, it's no longer doing its job. It is no longer capital. Capital without abstract labor is no longer capital. So what we've got is the peculiar position where a large part of the capital has been transferred to what Marx calls fictitious capital. And that is correct. It is fictitious capital, but fictitious capital, money capital, is not capital. It is not extracting value. It is not exploiting abstract labor. It is multiplying itself. It is obvious if you switch that way, it must crash. Unless you think money by itself, a dollar note produces another dollar note. It lays an egg and produces another dollar note. Unless you really believe that, it can't last. That has always been obvious. It's always been obvious since the capitalist class switched to finance capital in the middle to late 70s. So it's clear there would have to be a financial crash. But the financial crash does not end the issue. Because why did they switch to it? And has it ended? Well, to answer the second point, it's obvious that it hasn't ended. I think in the past discussions over here, what I've cited these figures, we have something like $14 to $18 trillion in banks around the world, simply lying there, which the banks simply had to use. In UBS itself, it was $3 trillion. UBS, of course, effectively went bankrupt and was bailed out by the Swiss state. It's now down to $1.5 trillion. Other banks have become more important, but it's still there. Well, if your money is in a bank like that, you want to get a rate of interest, you want to get a return, which is something. So what's going to happen? If you add to that the numbers which we know, something like $110 trillion of hedge funds, private equity, pension funds, etc., insurance companies, and so on and so on, where's it going to go? Where are they going to invest it? How are they going to multiply it? They can't. It's quite obvious. If the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, it can't hold. If you remember, the title of this conference is "The Center Cannot Hold." A lot of people realize it. At least the last person I saw that actually used that term, "Center Cannot Hold," was Bill Gross, the CEO, as people know, of the biggest bond firm in the world, ranking Republican, a liberal Republican, of course. And he made that statement in his report to PIMCO in 2007, in which he quoted Yeats, talking of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, middle class getting wiped out, etc. And the center cannot hold. It's true, it cannot hold under these circumstances. The rich, automatically, if you have a switch to finance capital in this case, the system switches that way, and neoliberalism, so-called, is an automatic consequence of it. It is not a separate policy, it is simply part of it. It is a necessary part of it, because finance capital is demanding a high return as quickly as possible of its sources. It has to go to industry because it has to go somehow to abstract capital. When it can't do it, then it turns on itself, which is what it did in the last few years. It became cannibalistic and exploded. But what it does in the first instance is try to go to abstract labor, try to extract the value in that way. And therefore, since it requires it as quickly as possible, it changes the policy of the industry itself. And we then have the neoliberal policy throughout the world. We have work turning into not just man's bane, as it were, but an even more horrible exercise for most people than it ever has been. That's why you have people like Jack Welch producing this absurd formula of 10% being fired, 10% being promoted, and everybody else feeling horrible. Well, that obviously isn't the way to run a firm. That obviously is the way to destroy the firm in the long run. The short term, it works. Short term, maybe 5 or 10, 15 years, it works. But it cannot last. And it's imploded. It's not just that finance capital as finance is imploded. The whole finance capital system, as it were, is now in trouble, and they have no other policy. If one looks at it, we have to ask, well, what is the policy? I raised it last time. Yeah. Well, what is their policy? You won't find a policy. There is no policy.